Hi again, everybody. Welcome to the Audiobook Review Corner. I am Felix and I absolutely love listening to audiobooks. On this channel I do reviews on the book I've currently listened to, and today's book is Reverie by Ryan La Sala. The audiobook was read by Michael Crouch and was published by Recorded Books and is about 11 hours long. As usual, we will start with a quick story summary. He drove his car into an old mill. The car exploded, the mill caught fire, and he was fished out of a nearby river. This is all Kane Montgomery, a high schooler from Connecticut, remembers from his accident. But there is more things wrong. He's also missing a lot of memories from the past few months. To regain a few of his memories, Kane goes back to the site of the accident, first with his sister Sophia, and then he spends some time alone there, and he runs into a schoolmate called Ursula. He quickly finds out that Ursula is trying to hide something from him. And she's not the only one. She's part of a group called the Others. This group consists of Ursula, she's the sporty, shy girl, a jock called Elliot, and the queen bee of the school called Adeline. And Kane has something to do with all of them. But what? And who is Maxine Osman? And did Kane really kill her? And why is this boy named Dean Flores popping up everywhere? While trying to find out all the answers, a man called Posey approaches Kane. Posey says he's the court-appointed psychologist and he is supposed to evaluate Kane. And he gives Kane a journal to keep. Now, all the others have magical powers, somehow tied to their personality. And they need to unravel so-called reveries. Reveries are people's fantasies expanded outwards magically, and they pull other people into it. They are miniature realities with specific stories in it, and it's very important for the others that Kane keeps away from them. The others are the only ones staying lucid in these reveries, while everybody else that sucks in basically goes into, let's call it a blackout. In these reveries, their powers come in handy. Ursula has incredible physical strength, Elliot can create illusions, and I won't reveal Adeline's for spoiler purposes. Then Posey shows up again, and we learn of his true identity. Posey is a drag queen sorceress, and he or she or whatever wants Kane to go help him find something called a loom, which is a very powerful artifact, and in return, Posey promises to keep the police away from Kane as they're interested in his accident. Posey wants to have more power, and the loom and a crown he's seeking are the ways to achieve it. If you want to know how all of this ties together, you'll have to listen to the book for yourself. I'm not going to spoil it any further. Let's move on to the critique of the book. And oh boy, let's get going with the critique. I really didn't like this book. The story has potential initially because of the mystery that surrounds Kane and his memories. And of course, a drag queen sorceress makes great stuff for a villain. But for whatever reason, the author chooses to reveal basically the entire mystery of the book at about 34% through, while not answering basically the most important question that people have. Like, what does Posey want with more power? Does she maybe have a higher purpose for achieving this power? Where did Posey come from? Why is Dean? And yes, that makes sense if you've read the book. Why do the others have their powers? We'll never know. And that's frustrating. And yes, I know that last question was technically answered in the story, but was it really? Was that satisfactory? Ask yourself if that explanation soothes your curiosity. The writing of the book, sadly, is also quite bad. A lot of small details in this book make the writing much worse than it has to be. For example, Kane mentions that he's friends with the lunch ladies, and that they always slip him a few extra fries on Pizza Tuesdays. Who would eat pizza with fries? Or is that just a thing I'm too European to understand? I actually had to reach out to an American friend of mine to double check and see if that's something that American people actually do, and he says, no, it's not. So why would Kane say something like this? Or is that maybe just a Connecticut thing that I'm unaware of? But there are other examples of bad writing too. For example, Kane's sister Sophia says she's quite frustrated with the police because they didn't try to pull fingerprints off of Kane's body when they fished him out of the river. But literally the next thing she says is that she checked if that's even possible, and no, it isn't. So why be frustrated or why mention it? That's just filling the page with useless dialogue. I feel like this book was specifically written to be as gay as possible, and that's by no means a bad thing. Every author can write, of course, whatever they want, and if a character happens to be gay, perfect, as long as the story makes sense. But I don't think this is the case here. Gay characters just shouldn't come at the cost of story quality, which in this case I feel like it really does. This book has a super jazz hand surface, but is quite stale and a little bit rotten underneath. And I'm not saying the jazz hand stuff, the book mentions them about 5 times. I also have 3 spoiler questions about the story that are quite important to me that the book didn't answer, so if you don't want to be spoiled, I suggest you skip to this timestamp. Firstly, the plan of the others after Cain went crazy was to stop him and delete his memories. So far so good and understandable. Wouldn't it have been enough to make it seem like Cain lost his memory, like for example after he fell off a ladder and hit his head? Why did they have to involve his car and into a severe crash? Now the police is being interested in him and that doesn't serve the others' plan at all. So it would have been much easier to just not do that. Secondly, why did the others keep their powers after Posey died? It's mentioned that Posey gave them their powers, but there was no explanation on why they kept them afterwards. Any explanation I feel would have been fine, but we get absolutely nothing. And thirdly, if all other looms in the story that Posey mentioned were physical objects like Pandora's box or the Holy Grail or like genie lamps, why is Cain a loom? And why would he need a crown? Not answering these questions satisfactorily was wasted potential that could have made this book much better in my opinion. The next part I would like to talk about is the characters. Specifically, we will start with Cain, then move on to the others, and finally talk about Posey. Cain as a protagonist is simply awful. He lies to absolutely everyone he knows, he keeps everybody in the dark, and he doesn't trust anyone aside from a person he just met. Like, in the beginning, Posey tells them to be wary of his friends, the others. And Cain, not having met Posey ever before, decides, yes, I need to do that. People I've known my whole life are not trustworthy, but this complete stranger is. And the most pressing example is actually Sophia, so Cain's sister, and Cain's parents. It's baffling to me why he would lie and not cheat, that's the wrong word, but keep something from the people he absolutely knows are in his corner. That just doesn't make sense at all. And especially Sophia, who has done absolutely nothing but be as supportive as possible for Cain. It just doesn't make sense to me. But Cain lies compulsively to her, ignores her for a few days, and then he has the audacity to wonder why she's angry at him. Imagine you have a friend like that. You wouldn't put up with that either. The book tries very hard to paint Cain as a victim because he's gay and he has been bullied for that, but just doesn't work because he's so terrible. I can give you a concrete example of this. Cain was bullied at a school because he was the only openly gay person in his high school. Understandable. Ursula, so Cain's friend and member of the others, was also bullied because she's very tall and very strong and she's very sporty, so she looks slightly mannish. And Cain jumps to the chance to bully her as well because he felt that she was an easier target than him, so he would get less bullied. And the book acknowledges that this is a survival tactic from Cain. But, very important, things just don't ring true about that. A, he didn't have to join in the bullying. In the past, he just did. And B, he still bullies Ursula in the present. When he first meets her, she sees him and asks if he's okay, and out of the blue, out of nothing at all, he snaps at her and screams at her and says, "Do I look okay? What do you think is wrong with you?" And that's just not good. Also in the past, Cain started a rumor, well, that wasn't on purpose, that was an accident, that Ursula was adopted from a dog shelter. But years later, he still thinks of her as a dog sometimes. Also, Cain punches Elliot in the face after a light to maybe medium intensity discussion and straight up threatens to kill the others in a crowded cafe. Now, the group of the others. The others consist of Ursula, I've mentioned her before, Elliot, the jock guy who isn't quite as like douchey as the traditional jock you would maybe think of in movies and books, and Adeline. She's the like beautiful popular girl. Ursula is the heart of the group and probably the character in the book I like the most. She's the first to check in on Kane after the accident, and she's most essential in the actual reveries because of her powers. Elliot is the jock, but not the douchey kind, but he's quite a smartass. He's pedantic and he consistently points out small mistakes. For example, he can't stand that people call something a lobster when it's actually an isopod. Adeline is the least fleshed out person in this group. She has basically no personalities and her powers are often very vaguely described, if at all. She has the least development in the book, and she doesn't get used on the reveries pretty much at all. And she only is the damsel in distress because of her beauty. That said, the worst thing about these three is that none of them really get any character development or anything remotely resembling a character arc. At the end, Ursula's still the same shy girl with only a slight increase in confidence around her friends. Elliot is still the smart ass who, now has a girlfriend, but that doesn't really change his personality. And Adeline's still the queen bee. And Sophia, Kane's sister, is still the overachiever, now with more older friends. And Kane's parents disappear from the book completely. But by far the most interesting character in this book is Posey. Not because he, she, whatever is well written, but because of what's not written. The mystery surrounding Posey is what makes them fascinating. All these questions surrounding Posey make them a character that's actually quite interesting. Like, where did they come from? How did she get her powers? What's her motivation to get even more power? I recognize that answering too many of those questions in a bad way would degrade from the quality of the character of Posey, and not just influence the character but also the book itself. As it stands now, Posey is the villain exploiting the others. But what if, for example, she had a higher hidden agenda? Like, for example, she has to find the crown to get even more power, which we know, but she needs this power to free someone that's captured, for example. That would make Posey even more interesting, but sadly we don't get any of that here. The next part in the review is the acting. The actor Michael Crouch does, let's call it, a mediocre job. He tries to add a little drama to his reads, but generally doesn't deliver much. A good example is the scene I mentioned before in the cafe, where Kane punches Elliot and screams at the others. The book makes it clear that Kane shouts, but Crouch barely raises his voice and does anything more than read Kane as, let's say, agitated. He does put a little anger in his voice, but far short of what the scene would have actually needed. He also doesn't do much during the very few comedic scenes of the book. The worst downfall in acting is the action scenes, though. What little excitement the story can muster is completely lost in flat and monotonous reading. I often say that a good actor can heighten a book one step. So a great actor can make a good book a great book. But this just doesn't happen here. But it's also important for me to point out that Crouch isn't harming the book in any way either. He just doesn't heighten it enough. His best work is what he does with Kane's confusion, because Kane is being put into a surreal situation. He doesn't have memories, he has no experiences of the situations, he finds out he has powers, a lot of characters try to keep something from him, so he is confused a lot, and Crouch does a good work with that. His best work in this book is a character that I will talk to you about in a minute though, because now it's time for the character distinction. The character distinction in this book sadly isn't very good. Crouch has a fairly high voice and thus doesn't have the easiest time separating male and female characters. For example, Adeline and Elliot are only really distinguishable because of the book's context. What's especially sad is that Kane and Dean have very similar voices. These two are basically impossible to separate, which is quite bad since they do have a few scenes together which are emotionally charged as well, which just doesn't come across. You can actually hear that Crouch is trying to read Dean in a slightly lower register than Kane, but it's not really working, it's not coming across. Especially with Elliot being in the same register as well. Of the 7 characters in this book, only one has a very distinct voice, and that is Posey, which is also my favorite acting choice in this. Crouch reads her with a theatricality and grandeur, and that does work very well considering Posey is a drag queen sorceress. But it's not quite enough, because if there's ever time to ham up a performance, it would be a drag queen sorceress. But Crouch is not going over the top enough, which is a bit sad. Considering that Posey is a drag queen sorceress, Crouch could have gone way over the top and it would have fit perfectly, but sadly this isn't the case. And while he does heighten Posey in regard to the other characters, it's not like Posey is like an actress or something. The next part is the production, and as usual, the production in this book is absolutely perfect. A very positive thing for me to say is that the reading speed is absolutely perfect. But I do need to remind you that I always listen to the books on 1.15 times the speed. But at this speed, it's great. And otherwise, there's no mistakes in this book at all. Moving on to the attention retention. And I have to be honest with this. This is one of the biggest downfalls in this book. The AR for this book was bad. I basically had to force myself through it. This was due to the combination of a fairly bad story and, sorry to say, like uninspired and flat reading. Even writing this review was quite hard for me because I just wanted to move on to the next book, especially since that's something I very much enjoy. And I also have some loose thoughts about this book. During the research I did for this book, I found glowing reviews of this book, and I wonder if I just didn't get it. One review specifically praised the characters in this book, which I just find baffling. Because aside from Kane and maybe Dean, if you want to be really charitable, none of the characters have any development. Most of the characters aren't even fleshed out at all. I haven't really talked much about Dean in particular, and there really isn't much to say. In the beginning of the book, he's this mysterious guy who just keeps up following Kane, apparently, to some points, and I think he only exists so Kane can have a boyfriend in the end. Also, during the research, I found out that Michael Crouch has received several awards for his acting skills, and this obviously means that he does have some skill. I wonder why he hardly uses it in this book. Because I have to be fair and say the story does give him at least a fair amount of opportunity to use his acting chops, but he just doesn't deliver. The next part is the re-listening chance, and I can say flat out I will not be listening to this book again. This has already been the second time I listened to this book and I didn't like it any better. And to be honest, I liked it even less because I've noticed things that I haven't noticed before. So let's move on to the overall score. Let's look how this book scores. The story I'm going to give 3 out of 10 points. Apparently I'm just not the target audience, but I just can't imagine I would like this book anymore just because I would be gay, because that wouldn't change my tastes in books, just in romantic partners. The acting is mediocre and thus it will get 5 points. Crouch settles exactly in the middle between not good enough to be good, but better than bad. The production is perfect and it deserves 10 points. And the attention retention will get 3 points. Applying the weighted scores, which I will make a separate video about, this book gets 4.6 out of 10 points. In words, this means it gets a recommendation of skip, it's bad. That was it. Review number 3 is done. I can imagine that quite a lot of you don't like this review and have a different viewpoint. If you're up to it, try to convert me in the comments maybe. I'm always up for a good debate, and I do often change my mind if I hear a good argument. So just go ahead and try. Also let me know if you have any tips for me to improve these videos and if you'd like to see a specific review. Watch out for the next video. It's going to be about a game. And thanks for watching. Have a good day and keep your ears open for a good book. Bye! My hands aren't in the shot. Why are my hands not in the shot?